There has been a long-time argument in the paranormal community as to whether banshees of Irish legend are ghosts or whether they are fairies. In Irish folklore, the banshee holds a unique and somewhat ambiguous position, hovering between the spectral world of ghosts and the enchanted realm of the fairies. This mysterious female spirit, known for her mournful wailing that foretells death, has been interpreted differently across regions and generations of Irish storytelling. To understand whether banshees should be classified as ghosts or fairies requires a careful examination of both categories within Irish tradition, as well as the specific characteristics and behaviours attributed to banshees themselves. In Irish culture, ghosts are generally understood to be the spirits of deceased human beings who remain connected to the earthly realm for various reasons. These spectral entities are often tied to specific locations where they lived or died, and their presence typically relates to unfinished business, tragic circumstances, or violent deaths. Irish ghost stories frequently feature spirits who appear to warn the living, seek justice, or simply cannot rest due to the manner of their passing. Unlike the nature spirits and otherworldly beings of Irish mythology, ghosts are fundamentally human in origin, representing individuals who once walked the earth in mortal form. They are often depicted as translucent figures, sometimes appearing exactly as they did in life, and their manifestations tend to be melancholic or frightening, rather than whimsical or enchanted. The banshee, or banshee in Irish Gaelic, literally translates to woman of the fairy mound, which immediately suggests a connection to the fairy realm, rather than the world of human spirits. In Irish tradition, banshees are typically described as supernatural women who attach themselves to certain old Irish families, particularly those with surnames beginning with O or Mac. Their most distinctive characteristic is their keening or wailing, a piercing cry that signals an impending death in the family they watch over. Banshees are often described as appearing in various forms, sometimes as beautiful young women, sometimes as middle-aged matrons, and sometimes as frightening old hags, with streaming hair and wearing either white or grey garments. The sound of their wailing is said to be unmistakable and bone-chilling, carrying across distances and penetrating walls, serving as an omen that cannot be ignored or misinterpreted. Several compelling arguments support the classification of banshees as ghosts rather than fairies. First, many Irish legends suggest that banshees are the spirits of women who died in childbirth or who experienced violent, tragic deaths, which would make them human souls rather than otherworldly beings. Some regional variations of banshee lore explicitly state that these entities were once mortal women who loved their families so deeply that even death could not sever their connection, causing them to return as warning spirits. The banshee's association with specific families, rather than with natural locations or fairy mounds, also aligns more closely with ghost traditions, where spirits maintain bonds with their descendants or former homes. Additionally, the sorrowful, mournful nature of the banshee's cry suggests a grief and emotional connection that seems more human than fae, as fairies in Irish folklore are typically portrayed as capricious, powerful, and emotionally detached from human concerns. On the other hand, substantial evidence points toward banshees being members of the fairy folk rather than human ghosts. The very etymology of banshee explicitly links these beings to the sídhe, the fairy folk who dwell in the ancient mounds and hills of Ireland. Unlike ghosts, who are typically bound to a single location, banshees demonstrate the ability to travel freely and appear wherever their designated families may be, showing a mobility and power more consistent with fairy nature. Fairies in Irish tradition are known for their ability to shapeshift and appear in multiple forms, which perfectly describes the banshee's reported transformations between young maiden, matron, and crone. Furthermore, banshees possess the gift of prophecy and foreknowledge, abilities traditionally associated with the supernatural fairy realm, rather than with earthbound spirits of the dead. The organised, purposeful nature of their role as family guardians and death omens suggests an otherworldly assignment rather than the confused, troubled wandering typically attributed to ghosts. The classification of banshees becomes more concrete when examining specific examples from Irish folklore, where particular stories and regional traditions offer evidence for both interpretations. In County Kerry, there exists a well-documented account of a banshee attached to the O'Brien family, who was said to be the ghost of a young woman who had been deeply in love with an O'Brien ancestor but died tragically before they could marry. This banshee would appear washing bloody clothes in the stream near the family estate, a traditional death omen, and her grief-stricken appearance and behaviour suggested she was a mortal woman whose love transcended death rather than an immortal fairy being. Similarly, the Banshee of the McCarthy family in Cork was believed to be the spirit of a devoted nurse who had served the family for generations and, upon her death, could not bear to leave them unprotected from fate's cruel surprises. The washing woman variant of the Banshee, known as the Bean Nye, provides perhaps the strongest ghost-like examples in Irish folklore. These figures are typically described as the spirits of women who died in childbirth, condemned to wash the burial clothes of those about to die until the time when they themselves would have naturally died had they lived. The Bean Nye, associated with Clan Mackay in Ulster, was said to appear as a sorrowful woman in tattered clothing, washing shrouds in a river while weeping, and local tradition held that she had been a young mother who died giving birth to twins. Her appearance was decidedly human and pitiful, with none of the otherworldly beauty or power typically associated with fairy women, and witnesses reported feeling overwhelming sadness rather than the fearful awe that fairy encounters usually inspired. Another account from Limerick tells the story of a banshee who appeared to a family member, revealing herself to be the man's great-grandmother. She explained that she had come back to warn her descendants because her love for them remained even after death. Conversely, numerous accounts portray banshees with distinctly fairy-like characteristics that separate them from ordinary ghosts. The Banshee of the O'Grady family of Limerick was described in multiple accounts as a woman of extraordinary supernatural beauty, with long golden hair that reached the ground, wearing a green silk dress that shimmered with an otherworldly light. She was seen combing her hair with a silver comb while sitting in a fairy fort, one of the ancient mounds associated with the sídhe, and her appearance was said to be so radiant that witnesses could not look directly at her. This banshee demonstrated the ability to vanish instantly when approached and could appear simultaneously in multiple locations, abilities that align with fairy powers rather than the typically earthbound nature of ghosts. The O'Neill family Banshee of Tyrone was similarly described as a fairy woman of the Sídhe who had pledged allegiance to the family in ancient times, and she was seen riding a white horse through the air on the night before significant family deaths. Various theories have emerged over the centuries attempting to reconcile these contradictory aspects of banshee nature. One popular theory suggests that banshees represent an ancient category of ancestral spirits who predate the clear division between ghosts and fairies in Irish folklore, embodying elements of both. Another theory proposes that banshees were originally fairy women who married into mortal families and maintained their connection to those bloodlines even after the mortal generations passed away. Some scholars argue that the banshee tradition may have evolved from ancient Irish goddesses of death and sovereignty, divine figures who were later demoted in folk memory to either fairy or ghost status following Christianization. A particularly intriguing theory suggests that different types of banshees may exist, with some being fairy guardians assigned to families, and others being the restless spirits of devoted family members, which would explain the contradictory accounts found throughout Irish folklore. Examples from folklore demonstrate that the question of whether banshees are ghosts or fairies cannot be answered with a simple universal statement, as different banshees in different family traditions exhibit different characteristics. Some accounts describe what appear to be human spirits bound by love or grief to their mortal descendants, while others depict powerful ancient fairy beings fulfilling supernatural obligations to noble bloodlines. The variety of these examples suggests that banshee may be a broad category encompassing multiple types of death-omen spirits, rather than a single defined type of supernatural entity, which would explain why Irish folklore has never definitively resolved this classification question, despite centuries of storytelling and tradition. Within the framework of attempting to impose rigid categories on fluid folkloric traditions, the question of whether banshees are ghosts or fairies may ultimately remain unanswered. Irish supernatural belief has always been characterized by a certain comfortable ambiguity, where boundaries between different types of otherworldly beings remain deliberately permeable. What seems most certain is that the banshee represents something ancient and powerful in Irish tradition, a figure that commands respect and fear, regardless of her precise classification. Perhaps the banshee is best understood not as fitting neatly into either the ghost or fairy category, but as occupying a liminal space between the two, embodying both the human grief of mortality and the otherworldly power of the fairy realm in her mournful prophetic cry.